We're very happy to welcome you on this festive season, and Jill and I wish each one of you, including those watching on computer, all the blessings heaven can give you for this new year. Let's pray. Lord, we don't know much, so condescend to teach us in this hour, we ask. In Christ's name, amen. Our subject today is the greatest subject that's ever been discussed in any meeting, in any country, in any age of the world. It's been discussed by communists, by churches, by the young, by the old, by the rich, and by the poor. Our theme is bigger than the universe, and I can only hope to touch it with the tips of my fingers. You may guess, but you won't be sure what it is till we're about a quarter of the way through. The Chicago window cleaner fell from the ledge of his second-story window. Coming down, he touched the canopy of a fruit stall and then rolled not too gracefully onto the footpath. Busy Chicago street. So people gathered around him and a policeman came officiously. "What's going on here? What are you up to?" And the dazed street cleaner looks up and he says, "Sir, I don't know, I just arrived." And that's true of all of us. It doesn't matter how old we are, compared with the time this universe has been going, even this planet's been going, we've only just arrived. But from the moment of conception, each of us has a definite date with destiny. We are chained to a large computer belt, going where? And we can't get off. We may sing with the pop singer, "Stop, let me get off." Won't work. Won't work. Suspended in an endless sea of space, our planet is a devil's island where all humanity is confined and condemned. The world is a floating geographic death row where we all await execution. And the main problem for all of us is not cancer or heart disease, though 3 out of every 4 in this country die of those diseases, and in every developed land. That's not the main problem at all. The main problem is meaninglessness. Is life just a disease for which the only cure is death? Is it a nightmare between two? Is it a punishment for the crime of being born? We need to answer these questions. Viktor Frankl, the famous psychiatrist who was imprisoned in Auschwitz, said that in concentration camps, big, strong men that had no reason for living died easily, and weak, frail men who had a philosophy of life that gave them strength survived. So we have to ask these questions. Are our lives no more important than that of a fly that's born and dies in a single day? What is all this but the murmur of gnats and the gleam of a billion suns? Is thinking only itching? Are values only feelings? Is love only a chemical phenomenon, even a mother's love? Is death the great benefactor, releasing us from struggle and pain? These questions we must not only ask, we must find an answer for, if we are not only to survive, but survive well, survive happily, survive in such a way as to make the world a better place. The world, is it a ship or is it an iceberg? Is it an egg or is it a bubble? And us, what are we? What are we? Meaningless clots of coincidental molecules. Parasites on a midge-like planet, its epidermis, tucked away in a forgotten corner of the universe. Is this truth, or is there something more to be said? Modern man's not only lost his way, he's lost his address. He's like the little dog that lost its label, found in the freight van on its way to Washington DC, the train, but no label. So the guard put another label on. Here is nobody, from nowhere, going no place. Modern man is like that. Man who asks the riddles has become a riddle to himself. For the first time in history, man doesn't know who he is and knows that he doesn't know. That's why Thoreau said the majority of people lead lives of quiet desperation. Fictional characters tell the same story. One man says, I'm not a man, I'm a mess. Another man says, I'm not a man, I'm a walking civil war. Another one says, I'm not a man, I'm a menagerie. G.K. Chesterton, that very great Catholic scholar and journalist, invented Father Brown, the detective stories. Great man, physically as well as every other way, weighed over 300 pounds. Sometimes got stuck in a car door. But very, very intelligent man. He said, if I want to persuade a man soda, I slap him on the back. I say, be a man. But if I want to persuade a crocodile from eating its 10th explorer, it's not much slapping it on the back and say, be a crocodile. What are we? Men or crocodiles? A famous theologian by the name of John Bailey said the ultimate sadness of life is that nothing lasts. The bloom of youth so soon disappears. The vigour of maturity so short-lived. And age brings weariness, forgetfulness and decay that intimate the oblivion and corruption of the tomb. That's why our sincerest laughter with some pain is fraught. You may have heard of William James, very, very intelligent educationist in America, psychologist. His early years, he asked himself all these questions, had a breakdown, looked like he was finished. But he came out of it, became one of the most influential figures in that century in America. And here's the wisest thing he ever wrote. Listen very well. All natural goods perish. Riches take wings. Fame is a breath. Love is a cheat. Can things whose end is dust and disappointment be the real things that we require? We need a life not correlated with death. We need a kind of good that won't perish. We need a good that flies beyond the goods of nature. The question is very important. For this reason, we're only temporary. Time and place will cease to know you and me. Men and things will pass away. You'll be moving on tomorrow. We're only here today. You've been on beaches and watched the wave come in and destroy the sand castles that children have laboriously built. Whether we're rich or poor, educated or uneducated, We're all living in sandcastles. We're facing an infinite sea, and the tide of death is coming, and it will destroy our sandcastle. So the questions are obvious, and fools like the stork put their head in the sand and pass it by. Dare not think about it. So they fidget all their days. They drop into the grave with their last fidget. And the world is no better for their ever having lived. There are a couple of clues to our problems. One of them is choice. You and I make conscious choices every hour, and those choices are determined by what we think about reality. What we think about the beginning of things. Is the world just a chance product? Is it an iceberg rather than a ship? Is it a bubble rather than an egg? The decisions we make are grounded consciously or unconsciously, instinctively or overtly, on a view of the universe, particularly how it got here. Subconsciously, we know that if there's no God, there's really no man, only animated mud. If there's no God, there's no meaning. If there's no God, everything's permitted. There are no values, no laws. If there's no God, there's no hope. If there's no God, there's no immortality. But suppose there is God, and suppose we're his children, rebel children, but loved children. Suppose God is offering us eternal life. Whatever our failures, whatever our weaknesses, whatever our mistakes, just suppose that there is a God and he's offering us immortality for the taking. So that's one clue, choice. We have to make decisions, and decisions are based on what we think about reality. There's another clue, the word ought. Ought we to use the word ought? In the word ought is our grandeur and our despair, our mercy and our misery. Does anyone ever have a right to say you ought to do this or you ought not to do that? We've already said if there's no God, everything's permitted. But what if there is a God? And here we are we wasting time as we study the book of books, talk about God? Or is it the best investment we've ever made? So we have to ask ourselves some questions. Here are some questions that will help us find the answer to the big question. Because the most important question ever asked is God for real? More consequences for thought and action depend on our answer to that than any other question. God either matters tremendously or he doesn't matter at all. Decide. It'll determine your life, your destiny. He either matters tremendously or he doesn't matter at all. So here are some questions that may help us answer the big question. Why is there something rather than nothing? Why get up in the morning? French existentialist Albert Camus influenced millions. His big question was this: why shouldn't we all commit suicide? Why not? Why not? How is it that a few atoms of dead matter getting together can think? In other words, the brain. This is the most complicated thing in the universe. 100 trillion neurons. Professor Haldane, great scientist of last century, said if my mental processes are determined wholly by the motion of atoms in my brain, I have no reason to believe my beliefs are true. And therefore I have no reason to believe that my brain's composed of atoms. Now, have you got it? That's very, very profound, very, very important. If my mental processes, my thinking, is determined only by the motion of atoms in my brain, I've got no reason to trust my thinking. Therefore, I can't really say the brain is made of atoms. Very, very profound comment. Until 1973, secular philosophy had wiped out God. On August 7, 1980, Time magazine put this in. In a quiet revolution no one could have anticipated, God is staging a comeback. After he's been exiled by common consent among the philosophers, now many of the chief philosophers are theists, that is, they believe in God. Time magazine, April 7, 1980, a quiet revolution no one could have anticipated. How come? What happened? Until 1973, philosophers and many scientists, not all, half of the scientists of the Western world have always been believers, approximately half. Doesn't matter what decade you look at, doesn't matter what country, don't let anyone tell you that all scientists are atheists. It's not true. Approximately half have always been believers. In history, the greatest of scientists were committed Christians. In 1973, all the presuppositions of philosophers and scientists were shattered. 500th birthday of Copernicus in Krakow, Poland. Some of the greatest scientists gathered, and of the many, many talks that were given, only one is remembered, by Brandon Carter. He spoke on what we now call the anthropic principle, that all the myriad laws of physics all have one ultimate purpose: to create a universe in which human beings could ultimately live. Now that was a shocker. The greatest discovery near to that time, for hundreds of years, had been this, that the universe had a beginning. Einstein wouldn't believe it. Later he said, the greatest mistake of my life was for a while to refuse the evidence that the universe had a beginning. But if it had a beginning, dear friends, it had a beginner. Will you get this point, please? What scientists call the Big Bang, that explosion from nothing that made everything, which Christians call creation. If that explosion had been 1/1,000,000th of 1/1,000,000th of 1/1,000,000th of a second slower or faster, you wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be here. There'd have been no universe. Have you got that? In the initial Big Bang, the moment of what we call creation, if that expanding force had been 1/1,000,000th of a 1/1,000,000th of a 1/1,000,000th of a second slower or faster, there would have been no universe. I'm not talking to you just in the language of Christians. Scientists today talk much about the anthropic principle. Since 1980, hundreds of articles, many, many books have been written, and many of them by atheists, trying to grapple with this problem. Universe had a beginning. How come? And it had a beginning in such a marvellous way, it cries out design. Here's a good book. The top line says, there is no God. Then no is crossed out, and above it it's got A, there is a God. How the world's most notorious atheist changed his mind. This is Antony Flew, the most famous atheist the world has ever known, who influenced such men as Richard Dawkins, Daniel Dennett, all the great names in atheism. this man influenced. And then, in this century, the 21st century, he changed his mind because of his study of the anthropic principle. Up till then, he was having debate after debate. Here's one he had in 1998. Does God exist? If I remember rightly, Flew was the son of a Methodist minister, but by the time he was 20, he'd given up God. And then he spent 60 years talking against God. And then he was invited to really look at what had been discovered since 1973, that the myriad laws of physics are very finely tuned, miraculously so, in order to produce the universe, this planet, and us. And when he studied it, he was convinced. You see, even a thimble takes some intelligence. The sky doesn't rain thimbles when it rains, does it? Even a thimble takes some inventive genius. And here's a universe, and it's overflowing with thimbles. It's overflowing with invented things, and you and I are the acme of it. We are the sum of it. We are the head part of it. We are the purpose of it. Now, for hundreds of years, scientists, philosophers said, look, the universe is so huge. And let me quote Carl Sagan. Some of you may have seen his show Cosmos that was on TV for years. Carl Sagan said, we are just a very ordinary planet attached to a humdrum sun in a forgotten part of a nook of the universe. That was Carl Sagan. No one can say it today. Instead, scientists are now talking about the rare earth. What do they mean by the rare earth? We've discovered many planetary systems. We thought they'd be like our planetary system, but they're not. No life has been discovered in our solar system, or as far as we can tell, in any other part of the visible universe. Now, my own belief is that beyond the ken of men, there are myriads of unfallen worlds. But as far as you and I can see through science, through the Hubble telescope, and it's a marvellous thing, when the Hubble telescope focuses on a spot in the heavens the size of a grain of sand, it finds 4,000 galaxies. But no life, as far as scientists know, only on this planet is there life. So that's why two scientists recently wrote a book called Rare Earth. NASA spends lots of money sending to Mars, hoping to find evidence of life. It's all failed. It's all failed. Most of the planets we know, for a variety of reasons, could not support life. And no planetary system outside of ours has ever been given evidence of life. Something you may never have heard of. The physical realities of the universe are basically two: matter and antimatter. Particles charged one way and particles charged another way. And when they meet and collide, they explode into energy. But in the Big Bang, for every 10 billion contacts between matter and antimatter, one element of matter survived. 1 out of 10 billion. The rest went into energy. From that 1 in every 10 billion, which amounted to many, many million ultimately, the universe was made, and you and me. You and me. You don't have to be a scientist. You can tell that if we were much nearer the sun, the earth would be a desert. You think of those poor people in Adelaide recently, heat going up to 40 degrees. Some parts of inland Australia find out a picnic. It's worse than that. So we know, without being scientists, if the earth was placed a little closer to the sun, we wouldn't be here. If it was a bit further away, the earth would be an ice cube. And have you ever thought of this? That when water freezes, it becomes lighter, not heavier. Why is that important? If it were not the case, all the oceans of the world would be solid ice, and all life in them would be dead, and all the planets would be covered by solid ice. But here's an unexpected phenomenon whereby when water freezes, it becomes lighter. So ice forms on the top of water and the rest goes on as normal. Here is a book by the man who led the famous genome experiment, had hundreds of scientists. They were trying to find what genes. We all have about 30,000 genes. They're in bundles that we call chromosomes. We all have 23 pairs of those, so we have 46 chromosomes. The chromosomes are made up of genes, and the genes have the information that tells the cells how to create protein and other elements of the body. Not just human bodies. DNA is responsible for the giant redwoods. DNA is responsible for every plant, every lichen, everything that breathes, moves, reproduces, including us. DNA, genes, chromosomes. This man had a debate, and I was in town a few years ago. I read the record of it in Time magazine. Had a debate with guess who? Richard Dawkins. Poor old Richie's had a hard time lately. You've heard of Stephen Jay Gould, probably the most influential scientist of the last century. He said, poor Dawkins, poor Dawkins. He seems to think that everything in nature developed the way Darwin said, very, very microscopically, very, very slowly. He said, no, it's not that way at all. The record of the rocks is that nature reveals phyla that remain as they are for millions of years, and then suddenly a burst. And of course, this is what Stephen Jay Gould called punctuated equilibrium. And he pulled the tail of Richard Dawkins for being so ignorant not to be aware that Darwin had been outdated long ago. Many others have also had fun with Dawkins recently. In England a few years ago, he laughed at Christians. He said, most of them don't even know the order of the four Gospels. I don't know whether Matthew's first or last. Then someone said, Professor Dawkins, would you give us the full title of Darwin's Origin of Species? And he swallowed and he said, oh God, because he didn't know it. He didn't know it. This man in his debate with Dawkins, I read the debate, very interesting, it's in Time magazine. He said all the laws of physics are so finely tuned, if they differed by 1 in a trillion, there'd be no universe. Time after time after time. He said gravity, for example, if it differed by 1 in 100 million million, and when you get 100 million million, you're into a trillion, he said there'd be no universe. When the debate was over, Dawkins took him aside and he said, this is the biggest problem of atheists, the anthropic principle. Steven Weinberg, who's a Nobel Prize winner, and I'm particularly now referring to atheists such as Anthony Flew was, because some ignorant atheists sometimes say, if you only understood what science knows, you wouldn't talk about God. That's just rubbish. That's just rubbish. For two reasons. One, approximately half of all top scientists are believers. Two, unbelievers acknowledge the problem of the anthropic principle. How do they deal with it? Well, they suggest that maybe there are infinite number of universes and one of them had to come right. But there is no scientific evidence for a multiplicity of universes. That is a theory of desperation. Steven Weinberg, he said life is only a little bit better than a farce. Complete atheist. But he said nature's been much more kind to us than we could have expected. Some of her laws are beautiful, elegant, harmonious. He said, way beyond any necessity. Scientists often in their research are guided by the beauty of the laws they're studying rather than whether they fit into an equation, because most of nature's laws are elegant, beautiful, harmonious, ingenious. Stephen Weinberg said, when the explosion of energy took place for the Big Bang, he doesn't believe in God, of course, but he said it was a very unusual affair. He said the likelihood of it happening was 10 to the 120th. Now let me explain. 10 to the 25th, that is 10 multiplied by itself 25 times. That gives you the number of grains of sand on the beaches of the world. 10 to the 25th. 10 and 25 over here. 10 to the 80th gives you the number of atoms in the universe, right? So Weinberg said, nature's been so much more generous than we would have expected, and the likelihood of the Big Bang happening is 10 to the 120th. In other words, if you were to search the whole universe for one atom and find it, that's the likelihood of the Big Bang happening by chance. Have you got that? 10 to the 120th. Number of atoms in the universe, 10 to the 80th. So this is much more vast. But if you could find one atom out of all the atoms of the universe, that's about the same likelihood of the Big Bang happening. That's Stephen Weinberg, who despises Christians. You've probably heard of Paul Davies, who's taught at the University of Adelaide. World-renowned scientist. He says, my scientific work has led me more and more to believe that this universe is a product of exceedingly great design. He says, I cannot believe that our human existence is a mere fluke, a mere blip. He says the whole universe gives evidence of wonderful design. He's not a Christian. Talks about his early experiences going to Sunday school. He detested it. Some of us have had similar experiences, we understand. But now he's stressing the fact that he has come to believe that the universe is a designed product. Roger Penrose, mathematician of Oxford University, he said, the author of this universe was a great mathematician. He devised intelligent laws, or we wouldn't be here. Fred Hoyle, Cambridge astronomer, atheist. He said a common sense interpretation of the facts has to lead one to the conclusion that the universe is a designed product, not the product of chance. He says it's no more the product of chance than you'd get a Boeing 747 if a tornado went through a junkyard. That's atheist Fred Hoyle. The numbers could be multiplied. They could be multiplied. There are lots of other questions we could have asked. Why is the universe so vast and so old? In order to create the raw material which made our planet and which made us. We are stardust. In the great explosion of the Big Bang, God's creative act in the beginning, there was only hydrogen and helium. Only myriads of years within the furnaces of stars turned hydrogen and helium into things like zinc, potassium, phosphorus, calcium, all the things necessary for you and me. So there are lots of other questions we could have asked. If the universe wasn't as old, wasn't as big, we wouldn't be here. Michael Denton, whom I know, he and I have appeared together on a platform in Sydney. Wonderful man, wrote Nature's Destiny, Evolution, A Theory in Crisis, great books. Michael Denton said, the greatest thought that's ever come into a human mind is this: that all the galaxies, that every living thing, that all nature's laws are for our sakes. For our sakes. I want you to think for a moment on what would happen if you were mountaineering and suddenly you see a collection of rocks framed to give a message. Welcome, Glenn. Welcome, Daniel. Welcome, Rachel. You wouldn't think it happened in an earthquake, would you? Or suppose you're playing toss-up with a man who gets 50 heads in succession. You'd know it was rigged, wouldn't you? Well, that's the way it is with the universe. These myriad of laws, so finely tuned, that if they were different by 1 in a trillion, there'd be no universe. Come now to the smaller thing, the human cell. Do you know how many cells there are in a drop of blood? I checked it up on the computer this week because I was cherishing an old statement that said there were 5 million. I was very disappointed. The computer said there are only 3 million. 3 million cells in a drop of blood. Each cell has 26 compartments. How many ingredients in a cell? You know, the cell's like a big city, humming, thriving, industrious, productive, full of machines, because you and I are machines. Everything that lives is a type of machine, and the cell is full of them. Hundreds and hundreds of machines. And remember, there are 3,000 of them in a drop of blood. And every one of them has 26 compartments. And how many ingredients do you think in one little cell? 6,000, as many as in a Boeing 747. Think of it. Think of it. And the most mysterious part of the cell, of course, is in the nucleus, where is the code that we call DNA. You've seen this helix in many books, where 3.5 billion code letters telling the ribosomes how to create proteins. Some proteins are just a string of 5 amino acids, some are strings of thousands of amino acids, but they have to be in the right order. Now, I can't even keep a bundle of books in the right order. Some proteins have thousands of amino acids, but they have to be in the right order. DNA is a code. When a Christian went to Cuba to address communists, because the government said, somehow we've got to get across to people that there have to be laws and they must be obeyed. So here's this man with a whole host of communist leaders, and he put on the blackboard, "This sentence arranged itself." Now, he said, of course you don't believe that. But your body, sentences written in every cell. How many cells? All books differ. Some books say 300 trillion, some say 175 trillion, but it's more than a dozen or so, isn't it? Yeah. And every one of them, except the red blood corpuscles, have all the information to make you. How many steps between you as you are and you when you were the size of a dot at the end of a sentence? We all were once, you know. Very humiliating, isn't it? We were all the size of a dot once at the end of a sentence. How many steps between that and where we now are? 6 billion. And all the information that made that is in the DNA. Think of it. All that info. You know, there are 2 meters of DNA coiled up in every cell. How on earth can you fit 2 meters of stuff in a cell that small? 3,000 in a drop of blood. But that's it. 6 feet of information. Now, when you've got information, you have to have a code, either a language like English, A, B, C, D, alphabet, but you need a mind. You need a mind. So these are some of the things that are disturbing the philosophers and scientists of the world. And since 1980, hundreds of articles, lots of books. I have at home about 4 shelves of books that deal with the type of thing I'm talking to you today. Did you know that the University of Cambridge now has a lectureship on science and theology? And America is coming up with repeat. Usually the rest of the world copies America, but occasionally America copies the rest of the world. And they too are setting up groups of lectures on the relation between science and theology. And there's even a who's who on science and theology with 1,000 names. It is one of the fastest growing academic disciplines. And with good reason, because our world is in a mess. Our world is in an economic mess. Countries like Spain and Greece and many other countries are teetering on the edge of financial collapse. Europe is reluctant to help its poorer members because their own finances aren't that marvellous. The world has great problems about water, about energy, but the biggest problem it has is nuclear. The nuclear club was once only 1, and then there was 2. Now there are about 9. And remember, it doesn't matter how small the country, if they have nuclear weapons, they can terrorise the world. Israel is smaller than Tasmania, smaller than Pennsylvania, but Israel has nuclear weapons, and Israel will not hesitate to use them. I have made significant warnings because they're surrounded by millions upon millions of people who hate them. But those millions are not very well educated. When education becomes more advanced in Mohammedan lands, we'll see a great change among Muslims. But in the meantime, Israel is perched there with their atomic weapons. And there are literally thousands of them now. Thousands of atomic weapons. The world has created enough atomic weapons to wipe out all of humanity hundreds or thousands of times. That's overkill if you like. You know how much money America spends every day on preparation for war? $1 billion. Think of that in a world where 1 in every 7 people is starving. You know, we don't really think very much about the poor and the underprivileged. But if we're like God, we should be thinking about them. A world where 1 in 7 is starving. A world where hundreds of children, thousands of children die every day who could be saved by 5 cents apiece. But here's the world teetering in fear, knowing that someday some little group like North Korea may start atomic war again. And the present nuclear weapons are thousands of times more powerful than the weapon that wiped out Hiroshima. I've been there, I've seen that place, I've been in the museum where it shows you what it was like. But now they have weapons thousands of times more powerful than that. It's been demonstrated the universe is inflammable, and we're only waiting for some fool to set a match to this part of it. Well, I have suggested to you that there has been a great change in the thinking of scientists and scholars and philosophers in the last 40 years. We've learned more about the universe in the last 40 years than all previous millennia. things like the Hubble telescope, computational analysis, all sorts of modern things. And the overwhelming weight of evidence is there is a creator and he made the universe in order to make us. What then is an atheist? An atheist is a person who believes nothing made everything. An atheist is a person who believes from randomness comes fine-tuning. An atheist is a person who believes that from chaos came information. That from irrationality came rationality. That from unconsciousness came consciousness. How on earth could people believe that? Because they want to. You and I in our daily lives encounter lots of people who believe things that aren't so. How come? Are they stupid? No, but they have a reason for wanting things to be that way. Julian Huxley, one of the greatest minds of the 20th century, said, I was very relieved to learn that God didn't exist. Sexually, I could live freely. But never forget it, an atheist is a person who says that from nothing came everything. From randomness came fine-tuning. From chaos came information. Now, there are many atheists who in their daily lives put professed Christians to shame. So I'm not suggesting in this talk that because a person is an atheist, they are necessarily immoral. I have known and you have known many atheists who are very fine living people. How come? It's easier on the lip than in the life. No one can live a consistent atheistic life. No one. Why not? Well, you're driving along the road, there's a little kid playing in the middle of the road, about 30 yards ahead. Well, kids are worth nothing, life's worth nothing, drive over them. No, an atheist won't do that. Atheists find it impossible to live consistent lives. But never forget it, many atheists live a moral life that puts to shame large numbers of people who go to Christian churches. What is the biggest objection that atheists raise to Christianity? Well, you know, pain. We all hate pain. I have often confessed I would swim through any sewer to avoid pain. We hate pain. And the atheist says, there, how can there be a God of love when there's pain? Of course, they miss the greater problem, and never, never, never forget this. The greatest problem in our culture, in our world, is not pain at all. The greatest problem is goodness. How come there's music and beauty and friendship and flavours? How come there's goodness? That's a much bigger problem. Well, what do we say about pain? Well, most of it's caused by human beings disobeying God. Most of it's caused by selfishness. A lot of it comes from our own fault. If I look at my life, many of the problems I've had were caused by that rascal, that rogue, Des Ford. That's where they came from. So a lot of our pain, don't blame it on God. Who here has had a terrible lot of pain because of a cyclone, an earthquake, a flood? Not many. Who here has suffered from people? Everybody. We live in a world that's in rebellion against God. There has to be pain, because pain is the best educator. The teacher I hate most, love least, is my best educator. What sort of a person would you be if there was no pain? Where does courage, faith, sympathy, compassion come from? Answer, suffering. I had so many debates with my brother who, after years in the army, was not a believer. The only way I could get to him was to say, Val, suppose life was just like a afternoon tea party all the time. What sort of people would we be like? Courage, faith, sympathy, compassion comes from suffering. But it's a world in rebellion against God, and most of the suffering that most people endure comes from people who are violating the law of love. Now, what's the alternative? The alternative is the Christian gospel. And the most wonderful thing in the world is the Christian gospel. Don't try and hide it in a denomination. It's for everybody. It's like the sunshine. It's like the air. It's for everybody. The Christian gospel is not restricted to any group, any country, any colour, any culture, any church. Like God's sunshine. God's sunshine can shine on the dirtiest plate in the sink of your kitchen if the window's open. And the love of God is for everybody. It's the love of God that said, "Come unto me, all ye that labour and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn of me, for I'm meek and lowly in heart, and you'll find rest unto your souls. My yoke is easy, my burden is light. All manner of sin and blasphemy shall be forgiven unto men." Oh, I love that. I need that. "And whoever comes to me, I'll in no wise cast out." What promises? God accepts the unacceptable. He washes the foulest clean. He says to a thief on the cross, "You're going to be in paradise with me." He says to a woman taken in adultery, "Neither do I condemn thee, go, but sin no more." Walks 100 miles to help a woman whose child is in trouble. Has pity on the tax collectors and the prostitutes. The only ones he's tough on are the self-righteous. Calls them hypocrites, whited sepulchres. Jesus wept. Jesus wept. How often would I have gathered you as a hen gathers her chickens, and you would not. So the alternative to atheism is the Christian gospel, and it's for everybody like the sunshine, it's for everybody like the air. What happens when you accept it? One, you find meaning. Life means intensely, and it means good. It's an opportunity to bless. It's an opportunity to make people happy. And you only find happiness by giving it away. You never find happiness by looking for happiness. If anyone would come after me, let him deny himself. We're to deny ourselves the way Peter denied Christ. You've got to act as though you're not there. Don't live cafeteria style, self-service all the way. Happiness comes in serving. So what happens when I become a believer in the gospel? I find meaning, and the meaning is delirious. It is wonderful. It's full of hope, glory, immortality. And it gives me a standard by which to judge all those things that profess to be truth. It gives me a standard. And I don't have to be fearful about tomorrow, because God will be there tomorrow. He said to Moses, "Tell them I am." Can be translated I will be. The I am always will be. Tomorrow's God's tomorrow. So whatever the day, we can say with the psalmist, "This is the day the Lord has made. We'll be glad and rejoice in it, because all things work together for good to those that love God." Hairs of your head are all numbered. Wonderful thing to be a believer in the gospel. It means that evil can never triumph ultimately, that all things will be resolved and made right. We call it Judgment Day. That God is sovereign, he's in control, but he's a lot more patient than you and me. Not in a hurry, but he's in control. Ultimately all will be well, and all will be very well. And in my weakness, well, the bruised reed he will not break, but strengthen and sustain. In my weakness, I can call upon him for help. In my sinfulness, I can call on him for forgiveness. Because he gives like a king. He's not mean and stinted. As his wisdom is infinite, his love is infinite. His forgiveness is infinite. That's why I can say, whosoever will may come. Whoever comes to me, I'll in no wise cast out. And once you believe the gospel, death is abolished. Death is gone. He destroyed death, brought life and immortality to light. Because the moment you believe in the love of God and ask his help to reflect it, however imperfectly, because we're all marred people, we're all battered and bruised. None of us are whole. But once we say to God, look, I want to do right, in all my stumbling, help me to stumble toward your kingdom. Once we do that, we have eternal life. We're accepted in the beloved. We're complete in him. So the option is for all of us. We can choose where the evidence is leading us and accept the good news that there's meaning in the life, that there's a God who is sovereign and Lord, but who's also Saviour and friend. Or we can choose to believe that life has no meaning. It's just a dusty scuffle across a parched terrain, that thinking's only itching, that feelings, values are only feelings, love's only a chemical phenomenon. You can believe that if you like. And if you believe that, you don't have to wait for hell. It's already come. Let's take a break.